What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly show where I go over the comic books that I bought, give you an idea what they're all about, and let you know whether there's something you should go back to the comic book shop for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with AllNew Wolverine number 14. So this is a book that I didn't pick up last month, so I had to pick it up this week. And really what it is for Enemy of the State number 2, which is written by Tom Taylor. This is basically a transition piece. So it shows the aftermath of what happened to Laura Kinney when the trigger scent was sent over this small town and the unfortunate results for those townspeople, as well as how Laura got into her current situation. So there's a lot of different aspects that are going on in there, and primarily it's revolving around how she's using connections or tactics to get through everything without necessarily being detected. It's some of that stuff that you normally see like jumped over in a story, but Tom Taylor seems to be using this to fill time and kind of give a covert appeal to this actual story, kind of like The Fugitive, except starring Laura Kinney. So it was a pretty good story as it led up into this. So ultimately, this is the transition from being on a ship with a former lover of Logan, evidently, Captain Ash, and being on the way to Madripoor, and we see Bellona, one of the sisters, come back and be a kind of a villainess role in this respect. So there's a whole lot of stuff that goes down, a lot of drama that happens on the actual ship, and ultimately Laura finds that she's extremely displeased with the actual cargo that she's sharing space with, and ultimately that's how things finish up. So Enemy of the State is far from over, but it's one of those things where he's regaining his traction, and Tom Taylor's putting together a pretty good story on the heels of Civil War II's kind of old man Logan confrontation. I'd say that it's one to keep reading if you're interested in Wolverine. It's not necessarily a jumping off point at this point in time, but I can't really recommend people get into it anew because you'd have to go back a few issues. Next, we're going to talk about Avengers number 2. So Avengers number 2 from Mark Waid and Mike Del Mundo. This continues along with the Kang War, and we see more Kangs. So that's really odd because there's two different speeds on this. There's one where we have everybody together and we're going to get a whole heck of a lot of exposition. There's just going to be tons of dialogue that's explaining how things are happening and what's happening. And then it goes into action, and then there's more exposition, and then there's more action. And it's really, I don't know, man, the pacing feels a little bit weird for me. I like the cool idea that Herc is the only person that they can really rely on because nobody knows when he's born, so how can you kill him when he's a baby? But it feels like there's so much that they're trying to get people up to speed on, and everything seems like an exceedingly convenient solution for a very complex and complicated situation. It's really odd. You've got the Avengers where if they jump out of limbo, if they jump back into the time stream, they're essentially dead. And how convenient that Hercules knows a friend who's one of the old Greek gods of the Pantheon and happens to have an artifact that can really maintain the stability of those people coming out of limbo. It's just one of those things where it's not necessarily what I was looking for in this book, and it's making it harder for me to kind of stick with it over time. Your mileage may vary on this one, but it's not necessarily making the top of my list this week. Another book I decided to pick up was Aquaman number 12. So this is going to be the beginning of the Deluge storyline, where we see the utter destruction of a number of different cities and a lot of casualties, and everything's blamed on Atlantis. But for those that have been reading along, you know that it's really the function of Nemo, an organization that's it's basically run by Black Manta now, and they're taking advantage of old Attilian technology to really give a show. So the United States declares war on Atlantis, and Atlantis is, in defense mode, and Arthur's trying to salvage whatever relationship he can. And then ultimately you got to realize that some friends of Aquaman are going to come in and try and take on this task. So that's where we're at right now. There's a whole lot of escalation that happens in this issue. If you're not into like the super politically kind of things, I get it, but it's one of those situations where hopefully we're going to get some resolution, some understanding, and some forward movement for this, trying to kind of minimize the actual impact of the war of the U.S. on Atlantis and moving forward into the Black Manta conflict. Then once we get done with Aquaman, I want to move on to the Clone Conspiracy number 3. So the Clone Conspiracy number 3 is, well, it got what I wanted. So I wanted more plot progression. I wanted to have an understanding of where these things are going, and we got a little bit more development regarding, why people are keeping Peter Parker on the outs, even though we already knew, and there was development in the actual Amazing Spider-Man book regarding this. We got to see Dr. Octopus continue to play his role inside the Jackal's organization, and then ultimately we have the giant reveal of who the Jackal is, which you've been reading the comments was kind of a theory that I had going along. I don't want to spoil it for you guys here, but it's totally shifting the story midway into a whole different set of gears that require a ton of explanation. So this just means that if you want to not be completely, lost in how everything kind of came to be, you're going to have to continue to read The Clone Conspiracy. I do have some problems with the continuity because why is Prowler not on Alcatraz? What happened between him and Electro? And how does that play into the Prowler tie-in? There's still no mention of Cindy Moon or anything like that anywhere in here, so that means that her tie-in is still completely unnecessary at this point in time. So it is Dan Slott's writing the main book, but he's not giving a lot of direction to the other individuals to see how they can kind of interact those things into this main title. It's keeping them relatively irrelevant. Definitely a good book to pick up if you want to know where the future of Spider-Man's going and where this clone conspiracy saga is kind of headed. I don't necessarily know if I can recommend it, but damn it, I'm going to roll with it. Another book that I'm going to kind of have to roll with is Green Arrow number 12. So this begins the Emerald Outlaw story arc. And this really sees the public perception and portrayal of Oliver Queen and the Green Arrow character inside the city of Seattle. There's a particularly funny scene where, people from Emerald Comic-Con are dressed up as Arrow and Batman, and there's really kind of a funny back and forth on that. There's a commentary on the whole social justice warrior aspect of comic books and how that's getting injected into different books. And really, it's just Black Canary has a really good idea about not really going after who Oliver Queen used to be and just kind of embracing the whole Green Arrow persona, and that's probably going to backfire on him if that's the case going forward. If you're looking to jump onto Green Arrow, this is going to be probably one of the best times to do that, so I definitely recommend getting on with that. It is losing a little bit of steam, but the grouping of Ben Percy and Otto Schmidt, which is the first series, the first run that they're doing, gives me high hopes for how this one's going to end. But another story arc that I have high hopes for is Nightwing number 10's Bloodhaven. So Bloodhaven is kind of like an analog to Atlantic City, so there's all these casinos, there's a boardwalk and all that kind of stuff, and Nightwing in previous iterations had become kind of the patron hero of that city, so this is him revisiting that even though he's probably never been there before, but he's in the process of adopting those things. You get some very cool interactions with other heroes that villains really, that I'm going to have to look up and get a little bit more reference on, like Gorilla Grimm, as well as Defacer, and to kind of see where this plot is kind of moving. But there is a really kind of touching scene where Dick Grayson is giving his interview at the Haven, this community center, as to what he really wants to say to the person that's interviewing, but not necessarily what he actually does. So I really like how Tim Seeley injected that and gave a little bit more of that emotional expression to Dick Grayson. Highly recommend going to grab Nightwing number 10. If you haven't been reading, this is still a pretty good one to jump onto. But then we leave Nightwing and we head over to Green Lanterns number 12. So Green Lanterns number 12 sees the continuation of the Phantom Ring arc. And what this has is it's got, our main lantern of all colors possessing the Phantom Ring. And it's really when you start feeling for Frank is when he realizes that he doesn't have control. He realizes that he may have made some sort of mistake, but Volthoom is ultimately the one behind all this. And he's just using Frank as a tool. And he's willingly being used as a tool because he's preying on the weakness of Frank as an individual. He doesn't have the natural willpower to be called by the ring and overcome those things, which is funny because that's actually drawing parallels to the conversations that Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz are having inside their own heads. Simon fears that he doesn't have nearly enough power and that the Phantom Ring can do that. Jessica, she's worried that she's not worthy and that the ring chose her for the wrong reasons. So this is a really good story arc, and I'm really glad that I jumped onto this one at this point in time. It feels like it just needs a push just a little bit further. The character development's pretty good, but ultimately it just needs to start chugging along as we get towards those final few installments of the arc. One story arc that is coming to the close is in Moon Knight number 9. So this is where we see all the iterations of Mark Spector that have really happened in the course of these first 9 issues come together and realize that they are not necessarily the main part of the story. They are not the main character in this tale. And it's really interesting the way Jeff Lemire portrays that, because the first character that was really underdeveloped, this Moon Knight, so he's a space Moon Knight fighting against space werewolves, that Mark Spector is the first one to evaporate into sand, the first one to be pushed from the consciousness of Mark Spector. And that's super cool because like Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood, they even call him a sketch, he was never fully realized. So I really appreciate the way that he's kind of paralleling the story, the actual development of the characters inside the comic book compared to how they've been developed as characters throughout the history of Moon Knight. So this is just him saying, all right, we're kind of cutting out all this multiple personality perspective for now, and we're putting that by the wayside. We're stuffing everybody in their own individual box, and now Mark Spector, as the main Moon Knight, is in control, and now it's time for him to take on Khonshu. And it's a really good closure to that whole aspect and how Moon Knight is going to be moving forward. I still recommend this book because Jeff Lemire writes a great book, and now that Greg Smallwood is going to be doing the primary art, there's not going to be all those changing art styles. He just does great textures. His portrayal of New Egypt is fantastic. I can't recommend Moon Knight enough. And then there's another book that I can't recommend enough, and that is Champions. So Champions number 3, it's interesting. Okay, so you're going to have to bear with me for a second, because the reason I say it's interesting is because the last page reveal of issue number 2 was just like, oh my god, and it was just one of those things where it was completely out of the blue, and then to start off this issue in the exact same manner, and then have it be the immediate moment after those things, made me literally laugh out loud. So that's a really fun atmosphere to introduce these characters in, and then immediately Mark Waid just goes, you know what, real world issues, and just smashes you in the face with them. So the oppression of girls and things like that in the Middle Eastern cultures, and how they're kind of demeaning them, not allowing them to, get educated and all those kind of things. It's just ridiculous how quickly it turns into that. So I'm glad I got my laughs out of the way early, because immediately almost the entire rest of the book goes super serious and real world issues that are happening right now. So it's definitely still very much geared towards a good younger reader, and I still see a lot of promise in it. But for those of you that are looking to separate a little bit more of your modern political aspects from your comic books, I can see where you're totally going to be divided on this one. But it's a recommendation from me because I found it really enjoyable despite all those things. All right, so I'm going to have to brace myself a little bit for this one, because Batman number 12 is a book that I know that there's a few people out there, maybe a lot of people, maybe the majority of people are really going to dislike this book. And this is going to be your opportunity to no longer read Batman. I don't necessarily say that I would agree with that. The thing is that we get another parallel to Batman issue number 10. So Batman issue number 10 was the one where Selina Kyle wrote the letter to Bruce Wayne, to Batman, giving him the reasons as to why she's done this. And this story being told in this one, the text over the actual physical art, because the art is simply just Batman breaking his way through Santa Prisca, just destroying all these individual hench people of Bane on his way to meet Bane on his throne of skulls. The story that's being told over that isn't necessarily an eloquent Bruce Wayne. It's not necessarily a man that's writing with a lot of flourish. It's more of, heartfelt intensity. But the underlying theme of it is what's probably going to be getting people, they're going to be getting different messages from it. So I feel like there's going to be a divide on how people understand, how people receive that information, especially since it changes kind of the psyche of Batman. But it was definitely something that was hinted at in issue number 1. Our introduction to this version of Batman from Tom King was definitely, if you look back on it, it's just like, oh, of course this is how those things play out. But I'm going to do a full review on Batman number 12 so that way we can go into things in a little bit more detail. But it's one that I have to recommend that you read and then decide for yourself. But on a brighter note, we're going to hop over to Superman number 12. So Superman number 12 is a very interesting book because we're used to this kind of warm and fuzzy feel that's been happening over the last few issues. The last month has really been a big focus, or the last 2 months really, have been a big focus on Jonathan Kent and Superman and their relationship and how those things really kind of make Superman feel as a father, make Jonathan feel as a son, and it's really developing the Superboy Jonathan Kent character. And this completely disregards anything about John. John is just nowhere to be found in this story, and we get the reintroduction of DC's Frankenstein character. So he's part of SHADE, some sort of paranormal agency that's out there hunting down demons or whatever they're doing. And it was just really like this whole romper-stomper kind of run through this, and it's going to be interesting to see how Superman interacts with Frankenstein and the other members of this SHADE organization and what kind of threat is being posed. So the big book of the week had to be Unworthy Thor number 2. So Unworthy Thor itself was a really fun issue that reintroduced the Odison to the Marvel landscape, and we haven't really seen him for a little while, other than snippets here or there in the Mighty Thor. So this was a really good second issue for the character because it brought him into the realm of his allies who are looking to pursue this lost Asgard. Old Asgard has been taken by somebody, and who can take an entire realm? It's the Collector, who has almost anything and everything that you can possess. And what he possesses now is Thor, and he possesses the ground that Ultimate Thor's hammer lays on. And what we see is that Ultimate Mjolnir reacts to Thor. It's just like, all right, we're going to call down the lightning. We're going to bring this bad boy some justice. This is going to be the resurgence moment for... Nope. Totally not going to happen. So that means that we're going to have at least 3 more issues that are going to show the pursuit of the Unworthy Thor hammer and what that really means to Thor and how his character develops going forward. So I still have a lot of high hopes for this one regarding how it's going to meld into the Secret Wars history that they've kind of laid out there, as well as the upcoming War of the Realms after the Asgard-Shi'ar War. So I'm really excited to see where this one goes. Definitely gave me plenty to go on, as well as a lot to look forward to. Highly recommend you grab Unworthy Thor if you haven't already. Now we can talk about the brand new number ones, and the first one I want to chat about is Motor Crush number 1. So this is a really interesting story told by the group that brought the resurgence of Batgirl back to the DC universe. So Babs Tarr's art is pretty fun. It's got a lot of pink power that goes along in there. It's very intense, vibrant, neon kind of feel, and I think that portrays the actual world around it. And the story itself has got a little bit of backbone. You know, as a motorcycle fan myself, I really enjoyed that kind of aspect of it. You know, this global motorcycle racing league, people doing, you know, like late night races for this machine narcotic, and you're wondering, it's like, do they give these things to motorcycles? Do they give these things to people? Until we finally realize that this perceived asthmatic person might have something else going on, and we finally get the confirmation on the last page of the issue. But overall, it looks like it's going to be a really good, fun read. I'm going to definitely have to give it issue number 2, because I found it to be a very creative outlet for this whole thing. It's dealing with multiple things, and it's putting it in a very fun and action-oriented environment, so I really like that. Definitely a book that I recommend. Definitely a book I'd recommend going and checking out at your local shop and deciding whether it's right for you or not. From Marvel in the new number ones, we get Nova number 1. So this shows the return of Richard Rider. So this is what everything was really based on. You know, when you saw the original new solicitations, the new presentation in the previews catalog of Marvel Now 2.0, there was this teaser at the end, coming soon, and it was just the old Nova helmet. So you knew that Richard Rider had to be coming back. But this still focuses on Sam Alexander, but it's also going to bring, you know, Richard Rider to the forefront of the Marvel Universe again. And how is he going to be doing that? We do see some lingering effects from the Cancerverse, which is where we last saw Richard Rider, and Sam Alexander is still being a pretty average teenager in his school, so it's not necessarily something that I am, like, dying to go pick out the next issue, but it's going to get me for at least 2 to 3, so that way I can see how the character develops and whether it's something I want to pick up alongside Champions or not. But probably my surprise pick of the week was Doctor Aphra. So Doctor Aphra number 1 it's really fun. I really like the way that Kieran Gillen put this whole thing together. Aphra, she is not really a doctor anymore, but you find that out a little bit later on in the story. But I haven't really read any of the Star Wars stuff that she was in. I haven't read Darth Vader where she was interacting. And you get just enough backstory to understand that she is part of this universe, and if she's connected to anybody inside the Star Wars realm, it is going to be Darth Vader, and that's probably going to play into the remaining part of the story. You know, at some point down the line, she's going to interact with a big man in black, and that's going to be totally fine. But the focus is really on Aphra and her adventures, as well as her kind of team of cohorts and compatriots. So you've got this Dark Warrior Wookiee, you've got 2 droids that happen to be pretty homicidal, and Aphra herself, who's kind of an odd duck. She is like, if I had to describe her in probably 4 words, it would be female space Indiana Jones. I think that's probably the most accurate assessment that I can put on it, and I feel like that's where they're taking the inspiration from, because, you know, she's got a little bit of Han Solo in her, but it's primarily going to be that artifact hunting archaeologist looking to prove herself and make the next buck, and, you know, it's like, this belongs in a museum. It's like, no, man, this belongs on an auction block, so that way I can make some money and I can continue to adventure and pull out these artifacts that are across space. So I really like that aspect. It was very fun, it was engaging, and it relied very little on any kind of previous knowledge of the character or the Star Wars universe, which is always great for a first issue. I really enjoyed where this one was going, and I can't recommend picking it up enough. It looks like it's a really fun book, and I can't wait to see how long it's going to go and where the character is going to, you know, really push forward into. Because I see a lot of potential for this, especially since you can operate outside of any kind of imperial conflict. You don't have to deal with the actual wars going around. This is just the universe that it's set in, so you can do a lot of different fun stuff with this character. Highly recommend you go grab it. So those are all the books that I picked up this week, but I want to know what you guys grabbed too, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start talking about these different individual issues. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.